Hello and welcome to a fun video where we are going to see a dragon get slayed. By the way, for those who are watching the live, comment live down below, or if you're watching a replay, hashtag replay. And those watching on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, you get the idea. But let's go into the actual game that I have to show. In this game, we're going to see a dragon of Jan Christoph Duda get slayed in just 20 moves by the reigning world champion Magnus Carlsen. So you might know of the dragon as being the system with, knight f3, d6, d4, cd, knight d, knight f6, knight c3, and boom, g6 as the typical dragon. But Carlsen had something a little bit different in mind. Also note, by the way, that the dragon can also be played in an accelerated version via knight c6, d4, take, g6. And the point is, if you're playing the Open Sicilian as white, then you've got to be ready for so many different systems. And for the average player, it might just be like, why not just try to avoid these systems and make the opponent play on our terms? Now, there's a big brain idea. And so Carlsen plays the move knight to c3, which is actually aimed against the dragon setup. And the game will show quite well why, as black played the move g6 here. But you might be wondering, what if black plays a move such as d6 in this position? Then what would be the way to try to get the most out of this move order, you might be asking? Well, in this case, we can actually play the move of pawn to d4 and play a kind of similar idea to what we'll see in the game, where the idea is after take, you might think that, white is just some beginner because, the queen is getting attacked and we lost the initiative and, they're putting the ruler, smacking it over our hand or something. But no, it's actually different because after queen to d2, the nice point is that now after g6, we can play this move b3 and go for this very nice position where we're actually going to counteract the opponent's fianchettoed bishop. So say if the opponent were to play their normal dragon like bishop g7, knight f6, castles. Well, what we see is that after f3, this is actually a much improved version of a normal dragon Sicilian for white. And who can tell me what the big difference is? Normally white has the bishop on e3 and the knight on d4, instead of the pawn on b3 and the bishop on b2. So why is it that it's a better version when we have the bishop on b2 instead of on e3 here? And come on, I know you guys can say it in the comments. I get that if you're watching a Facebook Live, there's a little bit of a lag between what I say and when I see the comments. So it's a good opportunity for me to get a swig of water during the 40-degree heat in Sydney. But to show the difference, well, let's say, for argument's sake, that we play out the moves to get to that position with, bishop e3, f3. Let's say we do have this position on the board. Now, this setup, if white is able to get in, let's say, g4, bishop h6, h4, h5 sort of thing, then white is going to have a very strong attack against the black king. And I think you'll agree you don't really need to be a genius in order to, find these moves as white. But the difference is that with the knight on d4, black now has the option to strike back in the center before we get our flank attack going. And that's with the move d5. Now, to be fair, white is probably still better in this position. ed5. You're not forced to get greedy and take the pawn and, give black his counterplay against the open files against our king. But we can just shut them down instead with the move of dramatic pause while Stockfish is protesting, not wanting me to refute its play. Bishop to d4, we counteract the bishop. If e5, you just go bishop c5, attack the rook, and your position is somewhat better here. But you could argue that this is maybe even a better version. Well, better maybe is a bit strong, but it's certainly a very good position for white. And Eric says that as the bishop is defended, and lines up a nicer trade at a dragon bishop. Yeah, that's quite a valid point, actually, that in this case, we do have this pin between the bishops, and also black can't play d5, right? Because we're covering it with a million different pieces. It looks a little bit like a Picasso painting at the moment. Anyway, let's continue on with what actually can happen in some different positions. By the way, if you're wondering what black should do instead, he should probably play bishop h6 and play these very sharp lines like knight f6 and e5. And there's a lot of sharp fury. It's not really the topic of the video, but this is definitely something that you may like to explore on your own time if you're playing this at, let's say, a 200+ level. Below that, I think it's very, very unlikely that your opponent's going to know how to deal with this Carlsen anti-Sicilian, as it is called. Now, you might be wondering, well, if d4 is such an annoying move, then why not stop it with knight c6 in this case, and then play something like g6, bishop g7 in the accelerate dragon style? And yeah, you can definitely do that, but it also gives white some extra options as well. For example, bishop b5 is quite an annoying anti-Sicilian line where, for example, if you let white take on c6, and you get some structure like this, for example, then, well, what opening have we transposed to if white plays f4? Like, what does this system with the pawns on f4 and e4 remind you guys of? Okay, I think you guys see it now, that it is the Grand Prix attack. You know, normally you'd have pawn free f4, but then the difference is in some of the Grand Prix lines, bishop b5 is quite well met by knight d4, avoiding the double pawns. And it turns out here as well, actually, that black should probably play knight d4 and try to, you know, go after the bishop. But then there are some fun lines where you go knight f3, and, you know, white does have a lead in development. I won't say that white is necessarily better in this position, but white definitely with lead in development has some good practical chances, and, you know, if black is not very precise here, then white could, in a sense, get a pleasant advantage. My score with this in blitz games has been very close to 100%, actually. I think it might even be 100%, actually, from this position. So yeah, it's definitely a line where it's much easier to play white on a practical level, especially below the 200, 300 level. So anyway, yeah, the Traxler line is the one where you have e5, knight f6, bishop c5, and bishop f2 in the open games, just to answer Eric's question. So in the game, Duda plays the move g6, which is sort of, in a way, trying to be as flexible as possible, saying, well, I know I'm going to play bishop g7, but I'm not going to play knight c6 yet, so you can't go bishop b5, and maybe I go like d6 and go for maybe some dragon setup like this, for example. But it turns out g6 is actually a little bit imprecise. Yeah, Eric's right. A Grand Prix is how it's spelled, like, you know, the Formula 1 racing, because of the fast play, and, well, also it's named after the Grand Prix tournaments in England from the 1970s, where a lot of players below 2000 would play this Grand Prix attack and just go like bishop c4, castle, f5, queen h4, bishop h6, you know, just mate the black king, and it proved to be quite effective at this level before people started to figure out how to deal with it. So it's not the best of British, as it were. In any case, the way the game continued after g6 is with the move d4 anyway, which I believe is actually the best move in this position, because after takes, you'll notice a very important difference, that it's much harder for black to get knight c6 with tempo now that the rook is under attack. And now after knight f6, the best move for white might actually surprise you a little bit. Although the idea is in fact not so different to the Carlsen ceiling we saw with b3, bishop b2. Though that is not the move here, because we only do that when black has played the move d6 and can't, you know, blow it open in the center with d5. But here there are a few decent options for white. I mean, if you want to play knight f3, this is a playable move, and a more positional one. If you want to play e5, well, then knight c6 is kind of annoying. You know, your queen kind of gets kicked around, and, you know, queen e3, knight g4 is a bit of an unpleasant fork, for example. So, yeah, basically I don't really recommend e5 in this position. Works better for knight is on f3 instead of on c3 as a principle, because then the pawn is well defended, and you'd be able to, you know, move the queen to a4, for instance. But white goes for the move bishop e3, and the idea of Carlsen's move here, and by the way, this is something I also had in a game back in 2011 with the black pieces. So Eric has asked, is h4 okay for faster games after g6? Yeah, in this position, h4 is playable. Like, I mean, it is a thematic idea in, like, fast games to charge the pawn. But I would say the setup we'll see in the game is actually stronger, that after bishop e3, knight c6, queen d2. In some ways, you could say here that white has an improved version of the, let's say, the typical attack against the Dragon Sicilian that we saw a little bit earlier. And the reason for that is based again on the fact that, let's say if we have castles and castles, the one difference in this position compared to the Dragon mainline is that knight is on e2 instead of d4. And at first you might be thinking, well, the knight is more active on d4, so it's better there. But actually, it's more important that you don't let black get in the d5 break. Because without that break, black's play on the king side is very slow. On the queen side, I should say, is very slow. Like, let's say you go queen a5, for example. You know, white can just go king b1, and yeah, b5 might look annoying at first glance, but you've got options here. You can play bishop h6, for example, trading off the bishop that's defending the king so that we can attack some of those weak dark squares and go h4, h5. And if they do play b4, that's never really a problem when you can just go knight d5 and just kind of transform the central structure to your favor with ed5 and getting the space, as it were. So on that basis, a position like this is really just much better for white. In fact, after knight d5, even rook d5 might actually be a better move in this version, just to gain a tempo on the queen and go h4, h5. I mean, the attack plays itself, right, when you've got this sort of play. It's all very standard, so I think most of you will probably have at least seen at some point before, yeah? In any case, the game went a little bit differently, where black realized that, the attempt to go like castles b5, b4, probably it's the best move, but white is still better in these positions. Because white's play is just a lot faster when you haven't, wasted time playing bishop c4 and bishop b3 already. So in the game, black decides not to castle, but to play the move bishop e6. But bishop e6 is, I think, a little bit of a mistake if white finds the right move here. It turns out the idea of knight e2 is not limited to just developing the piece, but there's one other point, which I invite you to try to find in this position with white to play. And so, I don't need to, find a sauna to go to because, I already have the sauna in my room. Actually, I think I realized why it's so hot is because there was all this rain, just yesterday. It was just pouring rain. I was closing the windows because of this, but then I forgot to reopen them. So, anyway, that's probably why it's so hot in the room. Eric's come up with an interesting suggestion of playing the move knight to d5. I would say that knight d5 is maybe a bit less effective in this version, just because, well, the thing is you're moving a piece a second time, but also maybe more importantly, after knight e5, you're sort of giving up the initiative a little bit, because knight c4 is a bit of a unpleasant threat, let's say. And if you cover it with a move like knight c3, for instance, I mean, black's going to play moves like rook c8, knight c4, and just kind of have this very annoying counterplay down the c file. And if you go h4, they're probably just going to play h5 and kind of cut you off, so it's just a little bit too slow, in my experience. But there is a way in which we can actually exploit the poor position of the d5 bishop, as it were. And that is with the move knight to f4. If you want to go long castles, there's honestly nothing terribly wrong with this. But what's great about knight f4 is that you have ideas of taking on e6 and really messing up the black pawn structure around the king, right? And also you get the bishop pair advantage as a little added bonus. In the game, black decided not to retreat. I mean, you lose a tempo and you kind of lose the initiative. So it's not really ideal. There are a lot of moves really that kind of make sense for white in such positions. And we will see them in the game as well, because black decided to castle. And now, objectively, the best move is probably just to either take on e6 right away, or maybe castle first and then take a move or two later. Sort of, in a way you kind of keep your cards a bit closer to your chest to a move like castle, saying that, okay, I'll wait for you to play some move like queen a5 maybe, to attack the pawn. But then let's say if you had played takes and then castles, and maybe black wouldn't have played queen a5, but maybe would have gone, I don't know, rook c8 or queen d7 or some other move again. So it shows how sometimes by keeping your options open, it can make your opponent's life a bit more difficult on a practical level. But I mean, this would be the positional approach, like bishop c4, attack the weakness. And now apparently queen e2 is a really nice move, where you just kind of defend the bishop in anticipation of any attacks, and then you're kind of ready to go like f4, f5, and really just pile down on that e6 pawn, which of course is under a very big pin. As you can see, a lot of arrows finally are coming up just to show the ideas in a nice little visual style. By the way, if you're not already, this might not be a bad opportunity to remind you to take some notes, like to just sort of have the main points down, because that will help you to apply it much more effectively in your games if you make the lessons your own, yes or yes. But in the game, Carlsen decides to go h4, which is, I think, not the best move, but it's not a terrible move either. Probably black should go for moves like rook c8, queen a5, and try to get some knight c4 ideas, a bit like we saw in an earlier variation. White is still better, but I don't think white is winning by any means at this point. But after knight e5, well, white can now play the move h5. And we see an additional point in knight f4, that the knight is also supporting the h5 break. Now, it occurred to me that some of you might have a question here. As I see Eric is saying, didn't think of bishop takes, only saw knight takes wasn't possible. Yeah, that's in reference if the knight's on d5 and the knight is on c6, then yeah, that's a point. But if black does play h5, I think it's worth pointing out that this is probably an even better version of the structure for white, because now the g6 pawn is weakened as a result of the inclusion of these moves. It's a subtle example of the comparison method, but it's these little subtleties that can make the difference in winning games at, say, the 2000 to 2300-ish sort of level, and certainly above it as well. But after knight e5, h5, while white is just steamrolling with his attack, bishop c4 was played, and black is trying to trade off the bishops and go knight c4, because a really big principle to keep in mind in these kind of positions is that, well, if black is able to trade off the bishop here for a knight, the bishop on e3 that is, then how are you going to get rid of this bishop on g7, which is just such a great defender of the king? Now, there are many decent options for white. You could really make an argument for both the pawn h6 move and also move hg6 played in the game. And probably black should just play fg6, and, it's worth pointing out that you're not going takes and knight e6 winning the exchange, because, well, knight e6 would run into knight takes d2 grabbing the queen, so just to show you why that tactic doesn't work. But you could still play a move like b3, or even indeed knight d3, and white would still have a very pleasant advantage. It's definitely a normal position, but the white attack continues, while black has not yet created a real threat against the white king. So black plays hg6 in the game, but in general, you normally want to play f takes when you're defending, because now white has a completely open file for the attack to black's king. And by the way, this is the reason why it's good to play moves like h4, h5, because it's not just the pawn storm, but you're also opening up the file for the rook by using the g6 pawn as a hook for the king. A hook to open lines to attack the king, right? So, in any case, continuing on, let's see the move that white played here. Actually, before I show it, I want to see if you're able to find this move. It is a move I mentioned earlier in the video in a slightly different position, so let's just sort of make sure that you're paying attention and, you're not, texting your girlfriend or something while watching this. But seriously though, the move for white here is to play knight to d3. And I do knight d3 is that A, you're stopping the idea of the knight coming to c4, because now the bishop is in the way. Bishop takes doesn't help, because just pawn takes and you cover the square, and you can even go d4 and kick the knight. This is just an absolute dream structure for white, yes or yes. Whereas otherwise, white just goes bishop h6, take, queen h6, and basically gives checkmate. Black goes bishop e6 trying to deal with this, but white goes bishop h6 anyway, because now knight c4 is just kind of just hot air. There's no substance to it. Eric mentioned a move knight takes g6 earlier. Yeah, this sack is not really necessary, because knight d3 kind of achieves the same objectives of getting in bishop h6, but without you sacrificing a piece, as it were. And if, knight c1, doesn't really do anything. If they do take on d3, it just helps your bishop develop with the recapture. In the game, black decides to go knight h5 and try to lock up the file this way. In this case, there are actually several winning moves for white, but after knight bishop g7... so knight g7, queen h6 is obviously pretty nasty, right? Going for the mate on the h file. But after king g7, this is a very important position, because if you find the right continuation here as white, you basically just win the game. But if you don't, then black kind of escapes, where he gets time to, let's say, play some move like rook h8, for example, and start to, protect his king, as it were, by covering the h file and being able to contest that way. So that's the hint I'm giving you to see if you can find the move for white in this position. And well done if you found the following une petite combinaison of rook takes h5. And in a way, it's not even really that much of a sacrifice if you think about it, because, you're giving up the exchange, but on the other hand, after queen g5, you're already getting 2 pawns back for the exchange right away. So already in the worst case, this is very nice for white, of course, but after king h7, it turns out you can actually do even better after king g8 than taking e5. Now, to be fair, queen e5 is probably also winning for white, because black's king is just completely denuded at this point. But one thing you'll notice grandmasters do very often when they are attacking is that they are going to make sure to bring the remaining pieces into the attack. Make sure that there are no slackers, left that are just, having a vacation and, just, slacking off on the wage that you're paying them. That's not the way that we play chess. So white just plays simple but very effective move bishop d3. And here, Duda actually resigned. And you might wonder, why is he resigning? Well, if you think about it, white's just going to castle long, play queen g5, and play rook h1, checkmate, because the king will be forced to the h file, yes or yes. let's say they play, I don't know, a move like queen b6 or something. Again, you just go queen g5, king moves, castles long, and I mean, how are you getting out of rook h1 and, you know, the lawnmower mate? The answer is you're not. White is just completely crushing. Okay, computer says you can play bishop h3 to slow down the torture, but yeah, Eric, you got it right, where you saw that, yeah, you can just move the bishop, castle long, swing the rook over the h-file type. You're absolutely right. And yeah, you've done really well with the puzzles, by the way, Eric. You've got quite a few of them correct here, so great work and keep it up. And yeah, that's pretty much the video in terms of this game between Duda and Carlsen. Just to kind of help you internalize these lessons, what would you say are the main things, like the main 1 or 2 lessons that you took away from this 20-move win by Magnus Carlsen against Jan-Christoph Duda in the 2022, I have to look up what is, yeah, the 2022 Airthings Masters as such. What was your biggest takeaway from the game? And as you're typing up, I'll share with you the 2 main takeaways that I had from this game. The first one is, I think, the instructive point of how, in a weird way, it's actually better to have the knight on e2 than on d4 with this move order, because the typical way to meet flank attack is with a counter attack in the center, right? And so we see how, because of white's piece placement, like putting a knight on e2, meaning bishop b6 with knight f4, that we just don't let black get in that d5 break. And when the center is stable, it means our kingside attack is much more effective. And I think the second really instructive moment that I want to impress upon you was this moment where, you know, white played rook takes h5. Because when you're playing chess, you might have played a lot of good moves up to a certain point, but then we have this moment called the critical moment. And what that is, a moment where if you find exactly the right move, then it's going to shape the course of the game and give you good chances to win, or if you're worse, very good chances to draw. But if you miss that moment, the opponent escapes, and so you have to win the game or try to save the game all over again. And so we saw how rook h5 was just perfect for destroying the defending knight, removing the remaining pawn cover of the black king, so that white could then bring the final pieces into the attack and clinch the victory. That's about all for this video. Thanks everyone for paying attention, and of course for, you know, being involved in the chat. Really appreciate it. And on that note, I will see you guys in the next video. Before I go, also, if you are serious about improving your chess, if you're rated 1600 plus and want to get to 2000 plus, or let's say you're already 2000 plus but you're going for master, if either of those statements are true for you, then shoot me a DM. For those watching on YouTube, this will be on our Facebook. I'll put a link in the description or in the pinned comment to do that. But for everyone else on Facebook, yeah, shoot me a DM, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.